Time to talk Detroit Lions football. I appreciate, Chris, you given the time today. I know you have a very busy schedule and you're scrambling around a little bit, but what better time to talk football? It's like what we do during the regular season. Other than that, how are you doing?
Ay caramba, I don't have time for this.
You should always have time for football and to handicap the Detroit Lions. Boy, they got close last year, didn't they?
I was looking at some rankings, and I remember we were talking about the Lions last year, and their defense going into last year was considered laughable, near the bottom, and I gave a prediction that I did not think it was an unrealistic goal for their defense to finish 15th. And I just looked this morning because you asked me where they finished in my rankings, and they actually finished 17th on the season. So they came right into that 15 to 18 range, which I kind of predicted that they could. And if they were able to get that high, then they could do some damage. So I think that they met my exact expectations. And I think it was a good thing for them to experience a heartbreaking loss, to get there and deserve to be there and show a good performance and really have a shot. They could have been there. They could have made the Super Bowl. And frankly, I think this was better for them to have lost for a variety of reasons. I think it would have been too big of a jump too fast for a team in their position. So I much would have rather see them do what happened than to go to the Super Bowl and to not fare adequately, because I think that might have been just too much in a too short period of time. What do you think, Ron?
Well, one thing that other teams can take note of is the growth of this team in the last 3 to 4 years, because each time they've ended with a more positive outcome than they did the year before. Some teams try to get it done all at once. If that doesn't work, they go right back to square one. And some teams fail right at square one and they don't get better. And they're like the Falcons and other teams. They keep drafting in the top 10. So the Lions did this, and we know this happened in the 2023 draft and even the 2022 to some extent, where they were building with a purpose. And behind a careful quarterback such as Jared Goff, they've taken the next step. They still need to take some more steps. We'll be talking about the draft, free agency, and so on as the slide shows. But Chris, that's my answer, is that they built to get to this point.
Yeah, and what a bright future. I was looking at the top 25 players list of players under 25, and they've got 3 of them in the top 10. Sewell, number 1, Hutchinson, number 8, Mon St. Brown, number 9, Laporta, number 16, and even Gibbs came in at honorable mention, just outside that top 25. So they've got some young guys. They've got a handful of veterans. They've got some stability in coaching, and the future's bright. I mean, I think the fact that Ben Johnson stayed on is probably one of the most underrated events to occur in the NFL offseason for the league, because it really shows a possible change in perspective and maturity and goals that, how I see somebody should be. Because the natural transition for somebody as coveted as he is, as the offensive coordinator that everybody wanted, is he moves on to that other team. And then that leaves disarray at the team that he's leaving. He came out and he said, yeah, I thought about it, but, look what happens to these coaches that move teams. I'm not going to just move teams just for the sake of doing it. I have a job that's not finished here. And I felt that way all along. It's like, how the hell can somebody leave? And I've thought that for years. How can all these offensive coordinators leave with their job not finished? I mean, it just always befuddled me. And to see this guy actually turn down big bucks and to stay with the Lions and to be that character guy. And he's just one of many character guys throughout the entire roster. And that's part of the secret sauce of the Lions is, their depth is not only on the field, but it's off the field. It's the coaching and it's the fans.
Mm-hmm. Part of the success for teams is when they have coaching continuity and certain position group continuity like the Lions have in the offensive line. And they made some key signings this offseason. By the way, there was a comment. I apologize a little bit. There's a little bit of a clicking noise behind, but hopefully you can hear our voices clearly. There are key signings, I think. Ziegler, again, along the offensive line, who's a proven offensive guard. They add Davenport and Reeder to the defensive line, signed a kicker as well for competition. They subtracted a couple of defensive backs. One, I'll just state for the record, the Lions have a zero tolerance policy. Other teams, unfortunately, do not. And that's one of the reasons one of their defensive backs is out. And then Josh Reynolds, one of their complementary wide receivers, is gone as well. How would you assess the roster coming into free agency, part one? And then part two, fascinating to me, is there going to be growth with Jamison Williams?
I think their roster was pretty good going in. Their secondary was obviously of most concern, and then they've made some acquisitions. They basically have. I can't read my notes here from this far. They have 3 starter level safeties, and so they've got a little depth there in an area that was weak last year. So they've added a bunch on defense, which was nice. They added to the line. They added to the backfield of the defense, and everything looks really good so far, and looks to be better. So across the draft was, it's going to be too early. I know that you really hated their draft, and other people, kind of up in the air on it. I'm lukewarm on it. Obviously, we know Terry and Arnold was a great pick, and I don't know what's causing the ticking. My hands are doing this.
Yeah, I don't know with the ticking too. I did not hate the draft, but we could go over the draft a little bit. First of all, do you agree with my need area, which was the smallest, tied for the smallest need area of any team? Defensive back, wide receiver, and a young pass rusher to help free up Hutchinson just a little bit. Any differences with my need areas?
Well, you can't be in a position where Hutchinson is getting 3 times as many sacks as anybody else. You've got to, or pressures. You've got to have more pressure coming in. And part of that problem was, Houston missed the whole season last year, but he's going to be back this year to help. And then they've got Josh Pascal to help also there. Marcus Davenport, he's going to help out there. They should be stronger, across the board there, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, if all their guys progress and they weren't the highest rated edge rushers, the young ones, then there's a chance that they could apply more pressure up front. But, one of the things that they did attack was cornerback in the first 2 rounds. You and I talked after the draft, and Arnold was my number 1 rated cornerback. Rekestra was number 7. So to get 2 of the top 7 cornerbacks, they, like the Philadelphia Eagles, said, we've got to stop the splash plays. We've got to protect our leads. So they hit need number 1 kind of head on. So maybe that helps the pass rush because they have guys who could cover just a little bit longer.
Well, who's this? This Amarick Robertson that they picked up.
Yeah, small guy, nickel cornerback, pretty alert, pretty aware. Maybe he can help clean up some messes in the back end.
He did really well in the optional training camp, covering Brown. So that's a good sign. And Carlton Davis was very impressive also. I'm unfamiliar with where he came from.
Tampa Bay.
Okay, so a couple of guys that can help out nicely there that we've already seen this offseason making great progress or great signs that they can perform. And then Jack Campbell down the middle, extra snaps, looks great. High expectations on him also. I mean, the real optimism here is an improvement on defense, frankly.
Mm-hmm. So I won't put you on the spot here, but well, maybe I will. the Lions made one weakness almost a strength in cornerback, and the rest of their draft tended to hit on areas that were already strong in terms of 2 defensive tackles and 2 offensive tackles. I say 1 in free agency and 1 in the 6th round because the British Columbia guy, I don't know why the Lions have to trade up 3 picks for somebody who's completely unproven against mediocre competition. This is a 2-year project, in my opinion. I could say, tell me all you know about Mr. Manu, but I don't know enough about him either.
Well, he's a project. He's a 2025 add-on, so he's going to add, desperation depth for this season. He's a work in progress, but there is a potential high upside risk reward for it. So we anticipate nothing for 2024 from him except depth, and hopefully 2025 he has some experience and we can be talking more seriously about how he can contribute.
What area, if any, do you feel is a weakness on this team?
A strength and a weakness, I believe, is the quarterback situation. There's a drop off. I mean, we'd rather have Teddy Bridgewater as a backup. So we've lost him. We've got Hooker, who has a long road ahead of him. Apparently, he has some footwork issues, and he's not ready to kind of step in there yet. So Goff is what I worry about the most. And it's kind of comical. I see all these ratings of quarterbacks, and there's people aghast at the money that they had to pay him. And frankly, if you do the mathematics of it, and you let him run out his contract, and then even if you franchised him for a couple of years, you didn't really pay much more, and you kind of changed the whole philosophy of the Lions being a player-oriented and player-friendly team. So I don't think it was a bad move signing him to that contract. All these contracts sound absurd, but people generally don't consider Jared Goff a top 10 quarterback. Let's look back. Since 2021, which is he's got a 67% completion percentage, which is 8th. He's 3rd in yards. He's 4th in yards per attempt. He's 4th in TDs. He's 6th in fewest interceptions. And he has the 5th highest quarterback rating. That's going back to Thanksgiving 2021. And if you come back a year closer, we're talking about the identical stats, 67. So we're just talking just a year shorter, 67%, which is 8th. We're talking about 2nd in yards. We're talking 5th in yards per attempt, 3rd in touchdowns, 9th fewest INTs, and 4th in passer rating. So you go back 1 year, you go back 2 years, we're seeing consistency. This isn't just a short-term type of thing. And I don't think it is a system-only type thing. Replacing that kind of production, you're not going to do that. So that's got to be our kryptonite, frankly, at this point.
Yeah. Well, Goff is when quarterbacks throw few interceptions, good things tend to happen. And so one of the things the Lions are going to try to do is force more interceptions. Their turnover ratio regular season was -1 last year, even though Goff was careful. So if they can move that into the plus category, that gives them some free points. before we get into the season wins and divisional, let's talk schedule a little bit, because this is a first place schedule. There are three uncommon opponents: Buffalo, Dallas, and Tampa. Now, Tampa is winnable, obviously, second game of the year, and it's a home game for Detroit. But the Buffalo game is a tough one, and one that their divisional opponents aren't going to be playing. And the Dallas game is a tough one as well. So the schedule bumps up a little, and it starts with a rematch where Matthew Stafford comes back to Detroit. Sunday Night Football standalone revenge. Interesting game, Chris, to start the year.
It is, and it just feels scripted to be a wake-up call for the Lions. I was surprised to I don't know what the current line on that game is. Did I see, is it 3.5?
Yeah, I haven't looked lately, so it was probably in the 3 with juice range or something like that.
Well, yeah, I looked yesterday. I saw 3.5, but it might have been an old line. I'm not sure, and I just feel that that's a little strong. Oh, they're playing that game at home. I thought they were playing it at the Rams. I'm like, what?
No, they're at home for that one. 3.5, says Birdie in the chat.
Well, that's why I was sitting there saying, how the hell can they be? Okay, I misread the schedule grid, so my apologies. So I still think it's a dangerous game for them. I really do. It just feels like this is a payback, scripted type, slip on the banana peel type game to me that you have to be really cautious about. If they come out and they beat the Rams handedly, that's going to be a great sign. It's not going to, and maybe it's the Lions, history in me, I don't know, but it just seems like a slip-up spot. You have these slip-up spots week one every year, and I'm positive Stafford's going to be fully healthy start of the year. The Rams are going to be fully healthy. It's going to be it's going to be an interesting game. I think it's going to be a tight game, and their schedule is first place schedule, but it could be far worse. It doesn't rank as one of the more difficult schedules in the league. I know Minnesota's does within their division.
Well, yeah, I got two areas. One positive for the Lions, one negative. The negative is in the middle of the year, they got 4 road games in a 5-week stretch, and they're not easy. At Dallas, at Minnesota, at Green Bay, and at Houston are the 4 road games. That's the tough stretch. And then at the end of the season, 4 of their last 6 are divisional games. So no matter how close the division is, Detroit still controls their own destiny by the end of the year. 4 of their 6 games, and 3 of them are at home in the division.
Of their last 6 games?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
1, 2,
correct.
3, 4. Oh, 4 of the 6. Okay, yeah.
4 of the 6, and 3 of them are at home. So it's not a bad stretch for Detroit to jockey and to try to play their best football. And they have back-to-back Thursday games. So that means they're going to have 10 days off before they host Buffalo, one of their non-divisional games, one of their only 2 non-divisional games. And then they have the revenge game on next to last game, December 30th at San Francisco, Monday Night Football. So interesting last 6 games.
Yeah, the only thing I dislike is they play Chicago in twice in 4 weeks. I really wish they would spread out divisional games farther. It was worse last year with Minnesota twice in 3 weeks, and I'm sure there's a couple of other teams that have similar margins. I don't know why they do it that way, but their schedule seems to be pretty even across the season. Like you said, they've got the 4 road games, but you're not talking about much travel. I mean, you've got the Minnesota road, Tennessee at home, Green Bay on the road pancake. Those aren't far at all. So those are puddle jumpers.
Not too bad, and not prime time games in that stretch. So there's not any short weeks there. They also, as I see it, have very, very few outdoor games, which is another plus when you're talking about the accuracy of Jared Goff. So
they've got Chicago. They've got a late winter Chicago game in Chicago,
and then maybe rain in San Francisco. You never know at the end of the year, but it's not going to be 30 degrees. It's San Francisco. It's not going to be anything different than
Yeah,
that.
it's amazing. They've got no weather games other than that Chicago or San Francisco possible.
Yeah.
And they've got that 3 road games late in the season. That's home games. That helps them out.
Yeah, so from that standpoint, from a first place schedule, they know they play a tougher schedule, but it's relatively fair. Season win total 10.5, divisional odds on DraftKings plus 150. Any initial thoughts with either of those numbers?
I've changed my perspective on the futures because the value of money has changed. If you're talking real world economics, I mean, we were for years and years we're looking at 1-2% interest rates. The value of money wasn't all that much. Now you're talking 7% interest rates. So if you're not putting your money to work in a guaranteed fashion, you've got to be doing something smart with your money, and tying up money at the cost of 7%, because you're losing on inflation. Also, we've lost on nearly everything we purchase. Goods and services are up 25 to 50%. So the lost value of money makes me look at futures and tying up money 7 months or 6 months is like, it's got to be complete solid gold. And let's look at this stuff. All these numbers have been out for months, and they've been picked through. You think you're going to be the miracle worker to find true value that overcomes, the value of money, to tie up the money for those periods of time? I'm going to wait closer to season start, evaluate what happens then. A lot can happen before with training camps and tripping on stairs and such accidents that always seem to come out of nowhere. I haven't looked at it. I just don't know. I just feel that there is not any value. I think the Lions do win the division, so that would be one look I would make. Is the price fair? It seems reasonable, I guess. What do you think on that one?
Yeah, I give the Lions roughly a 40+% chance, which translates to 1 plus 150. So I think both numbers are properly priced. I think the division is going to be tougher. One of the things, that I wanted to ask you is who scares you the most in the division in terms of futures. If I think my percentages are going to be 10% or more return on investment, I'm going to fire on the futures, especially if I think I'm going to be ahead of the market.
Right.
And sometimes you get 30-40% ahead, because to me, with all the work, if people are doing the work in advance and they have a methodology, I still say fire away on the futures, because there's a method in terms of knowing where the market is going. Certain teams are public or not public. If you're not comfortable with that, then wait, like you said. And there are certain teams you have to wait. New coaches, new staffs and stuff. You want to see whether or not they're going to be more of an attacking defense or a passive defense. You need to know that either in August, or you can get in season wins like we did last year. But who scares you in the division? Anybody?
I think you have to consider Green Bay as the second choice. Looking at their schedule, they finished a little bit more difficult than the Lions do. I'd have to give more thought to it, but it seems potentially that Detroit might be coming from behind this year, potentially. So that's another issue with getting involved with Detroit to win the division future at this point. I mean, I just don't see the pathway that says, okay, by halfway through the season, Detroit's for sure going to be leading this division. If anything, I kind of look at it and go, well, it's not going to surprise me to see them a couple of games down or a game down. So why am I laying plus 150 at this point? Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and it piggybacks what Drew Dinsick said with Minnesota. We both kind of ended the broadcast by saying, if you're bearish on Minnesota, fire away. But if you're bullish on Minnesota, they're going to have growing pains. Maybe wait till halfway through the season when they have that brutal first 9 games. They could be 2-7. You could get a much more favorable number if you see signs that McCarthy and everybody else is growing. And same thing with the Lions, I would think, Chris, without putting words in your mouth. If you see that the secondary has made progress, if the pass rush has other people involved and so on, you're not that worried about scored 10 or more touchdowns last year. It's a very varied offense. But if you see, just because they may be equal in the standings, you may have a more positive outlook after week 9, 10, 11. That's what I'm thinking.
It just feels like that Detroit secondary is going to get tested, through their first 5 games of the season. So if they don't have it all in order, that could be a stumbling block for them. So I'm certainly not going to go in with overconfidence in it. I'm confident that they work it out and that it's good. But, sometimes you're slow out of the gate.
Yeah. The final thoughts I had here, and you may comment on any or all or add your own final thoughts. I don't see many roster holes for the Lions, even though I don't think they met every need in the draft. They met their number one need head on. They went 12-5 last year, but they were only plus 56 on the point ratio, plus this, 3 first place schedule and Buffalo and Dallas on the schedule. So they're going to have to be better, in my opinion. That's the way Pythag works. Jamison Williams, critical year for him, in my opinion, because without his contribution, I think they're a little bit lax on wide receiver. Old habits are hard to break. Too many trade-ups, 4 trade-ups. I just think at the end of my draft report, I said something about teams like that get to the mountaintop, but can they get over the mountaintop when they don't have those extra 1 or 2 draft choices to prevent a 4th down stop? Similar to the Saints, for those 3 years, they were the best team in football and never made it to the Super Bowl during those 3 years. Chris, your final thoughts or anything about this slide?
Well, this is the most pressure probably is on Jamison to deliver this year. He's been in the league. He was a top 10 pick. He's been in the league 2 years. He's got 3 touchdowns. He's got 395 yards. So there's good excuses for it. Both of his seasons were mucked up for various reasons. He's coming in healthy, and he's expected to fill in that number 2 role. And fortunately, all signs are excellent. All the feedback so far is that the off-season work and progress that he's made is meeting or exceeding expectations on that front. But obviously, we have to wait. His stats so far have been below average, versus the various defenses. He gets better toward the end of each year, weeks 15 and later. He becomes just an average. Like, he's been running below average as a receiver running routes. He gets up to average in the later parts of the 2 seasons he's played, and obviously he's got to do much better than that. So, and I think you've got a handful of receivers that can step into that 3 spot nicely. I'm not really concerned about the wide receiver depth. I think, one other note, they got their 3 big deals done. They've got Sewell signed, they got Goff signed, and they got Amon St. Brown signed. And then the guy that was in charge of making all these financial deals, who is, one of the reasons why the Lions have been in such great cap situations and such, he left. Washington stole him, so they had to replace Brandon Sosna with Charlie Atkins from Arizona. So apparently he's a big analytics guy and shows some promise. We'll have to see whether that affects the team going forward, but that's off the field type stuff.
So overall, probably bullish on the Lions, but fair pricing. No need to jump in, but high hopes for the Lions, right, Chris?
I have managed expectations of. I hope that it's the same expectations that the team themselves has. I think there was a little bit of uncertainty last year, but confidence. And now there are expectations on them that the season's not a success without returning to the NFC Championship game as a minimum, as far as everybody's concerned, I would imagine. I did see a ratings of which team. This would be a really good bet a sports book should offer is Super Bowl futures for the next 2 years. And the Lions were tied with San Francisco as the most likely to win one of the next 2 Super Bowls. So, and I do kind of believe that. I believe that the expectations are they are supposed to win one of the next 2 Super Bowls. I believe if Goff stays healthy and they stay relatively healthy, I don't think there's an excuse for them not to be there in that NFC Championship game. McCaffrey stayed healthy all last year, and that San Francisco team is entirely different without him. Is he going to stay healthy for another full season after a contract upgrade? I don't know.
Appointment football, first Sunday night of the season. Rams and Matthew Stafford at the Lions. Cris, thank you so much for doing this. I know you're very, very busy. I'm sure we got stuff planned during the season as well. I'm winding down. Only 3 teams left. Carolina is up next in 15, 20 minutes, and then I'll wrap up the NFC South after that. So thanks, everybody, for watching this one, and I'll see you in a few minutes.